Kashmir is underwater again. It happens regularly. These floods have been the worst for many years. Almost 500,000 people dislocated, without homes, several thousand dead, two of the largest hospitals under floodwater, and the region is in chaos. Now, there are many debates going on already as to why this happened. Climate change, possibly. Some say certainly. But how is it that when there have been floods in previous times, they have been brought under control more quickly and the costs have not been so high? Some Indian commentators are insisting that while it may be due to climate change and fluctuations, it is also due to deforestation and the fact that the natural drainage areas for the lakes and rivers of Kashmir have been built upon, that each bit of land has now become so valuable in terms of property prices, that there is a desperation to build on them, to sell, that the wretched market is once again intervening to the detriment of the Kashmiris who live there. Many people have a very vague idea what Kashmir is. It is, let me put it bluntly, one of the most beautiful parts of the world and has been for many centuries. It has become the object of a huge dispute between India and Pakistan, two neighboring countries with claims on it. And its history, its recent history, has been tragic, because it is not only natural disasters which have hurt the people of Kashmir, it is also the continuing repression by the Indian Army, which occupies this part of what is meant to be India for them in the most brutal fashion. It is the infiltration of jihadi irregulars by the Pakistani military many years ago, which has made life for the ordinary Kashmiri and extremely difficult, and not just for the ordinary Kashmiri, for middle-class Kashmiris, for Kashmiri intellectuals, for Kashmiri students. They live under a permanent occupation. The beauty of Kashmir is legendary. The Mughal Emperor Jahangir wrote in his memoirs in March 1622, they make their wooden houses 2, 3, and 4-storied and cover the roofs with earth. They plant bulbs of the black tulip, which blooms year after year with the arrival of spring and is exceedingly beautiful. This custom is peculiar to the people of Kashmir. This year, in the little garden of the palace and on the roof of the largest mosque, the tulips blossomed luxuriantly. The flowers that are seen in the territories of Kashmir are beyond all calculation. Then the emperor, surveying the lakes and waterfalls, roses, irises, and jasmine, described the valley as a page that the painter of destiny had drawn with the pencil of creation. And so Kashmir was historically regarded as a place to see. If on earth there be a heaven of bliss, another poet remarked, it is this, it is this, it is this. And its beauty, the non-sectarian nature of its people, calm, peaceful, was praised by many a writer, many an emperor, many an empress, and later many a politician. What happened to this beautiful area after 1947, when India was divided and the British left, is a horrific tale.
In October 1947, events took a grave turn. On the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, delaying its decision about accession to either the dominion of India or Pakistan, freebooters from the northwest and Punjab invaded the state with the connivance and material support of the Pakistan government to force accession by the sword. The raiders, well armed and well equipped, sacked and looted towns and villages, put many inhabitants to death, and spread a reign of terror.
When the British decided to leave, the agreement was that India would be split into two states, one a Muslim majority state, i.e. those parts of India where Muslims were a majority would be allowed a referendum, a plebiscite, to determine whether they wanted to be part of India and Pakistan. And this happened in area after area, but not in Kashmir. It didn't happen in Kashmir because in this case, the leaders of the Congress Party, Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, were not keen on the idea. Nehru came from Kashmir, an old family of Kashmiri Brahmins, and it was a big sentimental issue for him. So they avoided a referendum on Kashmir altogether. The Kashmiri people were not allowed any self-determination. The choices were only two at that time, whether they wanted to be part of India or part of Pakistan. Kashmiri Muslim nationalist leaders wanted independence, but failing that, some opted for India, but without any referendum. The country, Kashmir, was ruled by a Maharaja, a king with few powers, but who was of a different religion, i.e. he was a Hindu, compared to a majority of the population, of which 80% was Muslim. Instead of calling for a referendum, the Maharaja was said to have signed a document acceding to India. Many historians today in India and Pakistan insist that this document was forged. Using this document, forged or unforged, the Indians sent in the Indian army to take the capital Srinagar, seal off its airport, and occupy the country. Prior to that, while politicians were discussing what would happen to Kashmir, an ill-judged, unplanned, chaotic intervention by Pakistan and Pakistani irregulars, not the army, though with army generals, one in particular serving as its leader, tried a guerrilla war and attempted to take Kashmir. This was the Indian response: troops, planes, occupation. A ceasefire was finally instituted. Both armies were led by British generals, and they decided they were not going to fight each other. So the official armies were kept out of it till India went in, backed by Mountbatten. Now, the whole struggle for Indian independence had been led by Gandhi, Nehru, and others on the basis of non-violence. Gandhi, in particular, was addicted to this theory. His non-violence disappeared into thin air when Kashmir became a contentious issue. His many admirers may not like hearing this, but the facts are incontrovertible. What is the reason for our fighting in Kashmir? Asked Gandhi. I consider it barbarous for the tribal raiders to have attacked Kashmir. We had to send an army to fight them, he told a prayer meeting. And then he added, the simple fact is that Pakistan has invaded Kashmir. Units of the Indian Army have gone to Kashmir, but not to invade Kashmir. And if the two newly founded states went to war, what would Gandhi's opinion be? He replied, do I imagine that the several crores, by which he means tens of millions, of Muslims in India will be loyal to India and fight against Pakistan? It is easy to pose such questions, but difficult to answer them. If later they, i.e. the Muslims, betray you, you can shoot them. You may shoot one or two of us or a certain number. Everyone will not be disloyal. Another aspect of the Guru of Nonviolence's reactionary opportunism came to the fore when he asked and answered his own question. To whom does Kashmir belong? Right now, I shall say, it belongs to the Maharaja, because the Maharaja still exists in the eyes of the government. The Maharaja is still the legitimate ruler. Of course, if the Maharaja is a wicked man, if he does nothing for the people, I think it is for the government to displace him. But so far, no such eventuality has arisen. Now, this is a very strange thing for Mahatma Gandhi to say, because virtually the entire nationalist movement was opposed to the princely states. It had argued with the British that the princes who the British had put in charge of these states were not representative, and had demanded that they be removed and democracy take place in these states to determine their future. Now, this happened in some areas, but not in others. In Kashmir, because they were convinced that the Kashmiris would opt for Pakistan, they decided to use the Maharaja as an instrument. And hence, the language used by Gandhi, that the Maharaja effectively owns Kashmir, reminds one of the language used by the Belgian colonialists when they said that the Congo belongs to the Belgian King Leopold, which technically it did because it was put in his name after the Belgians occupied the Congo. But in this case, the situation was clear-cut, and the refusal of the Indian leaders to permit a plebiscite, a referendum, led to increasing unrest. One of the leaders of Kashmir was Sheikh Abdullah. He was a nationalist, very close to the Congress Party, close to Nehru, who he adored, and he was not in favor of opting for Pakistan, but would have preferred an autonomous republic and preferably independence later on. But they were worried about him. And when Gandhi was asked about Sheikh Abdullah, who was close to the Congress Party, he replied, I have not the slightest doubt that if we show the least bit of slackness over Kashmir, Hyderabad and Junagadh are going to meet with the same fate. Sheikh Abdullah is a brave man, but one wonders whether he may not betray us in the end. And in fact, Sheikh Abdullah, seeing the growing repression in his country, seeing what was taking place, did decide to launch a movement for freedom, demanded a referendum, and was locked up by his great friend Jawaharlal Nehru for many years. And so it was that the Kashmiri people were never actually allowed to decide what they wanted to happen to their country or their region. And the ceasefire line drawn between India and Pakistan divided Kashmir. Jawaharlal Nehru had referred to Kashmir, mimicking the Emperor Jahangir, as the snowy bosom of the Himalayas. Well, they got the most beautiful part of Kashmir, Srinagar, and the lakes and the rivers, and Pakistan got a tiny chunk of it, which was not the most significant part. So Kashmir was divided just like India was. India, Pakistan, Indian occupied Kashmir, and Pakistani controlled Kashmir. And there the situation has existed since 1948. From time to time, there is a rebellion in Kashmir. The people rise up and demand change. The Indians have been able to control it largely, if not exclusively, through military force. The army has occupied it. Terrible atrocities have been carried out in Kashmir, and Kashmiris feel that they are an occupied country and pray and hope that one day this occupation will end. Natural disasters of the sort that we are witnessing now remind the Kashmiris of all the other things that have been inflicted on them over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And they resent it. And this memory of the older generation, who remembered a different atmosphere, old though they are and many are dying, has been handed down orally in family after family in Kashmir from generation to generation. They know it was not always as bad as this, and they want both to revert to that long period of peace and to move their country forward. Over the last 10 years, there has been report after report published about what is going on in Kashmir without the West in particular taking any notice. Because what the Indian government did in Kashmir was embarrassing, since India was a close ally, especially since the 90s, of the West. Barely any politician from the Western world, prime ministers, foreign ministers, heads of giant corporations who are now treated even more importantly as more important functionaries than government ministers, none of them would mention Kashmir. The Indian government insisted that this was an Indian problem, which it was in a way, but it was also a problem of the basic political, social, and human rights of the Kashmiri people. And that side of it was never really talked about or discussed. So it's too easy to express sympathy for the Kashmiris when they're the victims of natural disasters, not so easy to actually talk about what has been happening to them. In 2008, an Amnesty International letter to the Indian Prime Minister listed his country's abuses in Kashmir and called for an independent inquiry, claiming that, and I quote, "Grave sites are believed to contain the remains of victims of unlawful killings, enforced disappearances, torture, and other abuses which occurred in the context of armed conflict persisting in the state since 1989. The graves of at least 940 persons have reportedly been found in 18 villages. In Uri district alone, a local NGO, the International People's Tribunal on Human Rights and Justice in Indian-administered Kashmir, states that extrajudicial killings and torture are a commonplace in the valley, and that Western institutions don't even try to do anything about this for fear of damaging relations with New Delhi. The figures provided by them are startling. They claim that the Indian military occupation of Kashmir between 1989 and 2009 has resulted in 70,000 plus deaths. The report disputes claims that these killings are aberrations. On the contrary, they insist they are part of the occupation process. They are considered as acts of service. They lead to promotion and financial reward. Shockingly, bounty is paid after claims made by officers are verified. In this filthy, dirty, enduring conflict, more than 500,000 military and paramilitary personnel, more than the numbers of the United States soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2003, 2004, 2007, 2008, continue to act with impunity to regulate movement, law and order across Kashmir. The Indian state itself, through its legal, political and military actions, has demonstrated the existence of a state of continuing conflict within Indian-administered Jammu and Kashmir. These are the words of local monitors of human rights in the region. 2 years after the Amnesty International report, on the 11th of June 2010, Indian paramilitaries, known as the Central Reserve Police Force, fired tear gas canisters at demonstrators who were themselves protesting about earlier killings. One of the canisters hit 17-year-old Tofail Ahmad Mattu on the head. It blew out his brains. After a photograph was published in the Kashmiri press, thousands defied the police and joined his funeral procession the next day. They chanted angry slogans. They pledged revenge. The photograph was completely ignored by the mainstream Indian press and the country's celebrity, trivia-obsessed TV channels. The Kashmiri capital, Srinagar, and several other towns were under strict military curfew. Whenever it was lifted, however briefly, young men would pour out onto the streets to protest and were greeted by the military with tear gas. In most of the province, there was an effective general strike for more than 3 weeks. All shops were closed. An ugly anti-Muslim chauvinism accompanied India's violence. It was open season on Muslims since 9/11, when the liberation struggle in Kashmir was conveniently subsumed under the war on terror, and Israeli military officers were invited to visit Akhnur military base in the province and advise on counter-terrorism measures after their successes in Palestine. The website India Defence, which is an official website of the Indian Ministry of Defence, noted in September 2008 that Major General Avi Mizrahi paid an unscheduled visit to the disputed state of Kashmir to get an up-close look at the challenges the Indian military faces in its fight against Islamic insurgents. Mizrahi was in India for 3 days of meetings with the country's military brass and to discuss a plan the IDF is drafting for Israeli commanders to train Indian counter-terror forces. Quote, their advice was straightforward: do as we do in Palestine and buy our weapons. In the 6 years since 2002, New Delhi had purchased $5 billion worth of weaponry from Israelis to good effect. Demonstrations against Indian security forces escalated in early June 2010 when it was revealed in the extra alert Kashmiri press that 3 young men, Muhammad Shafi, Shehzad Ahmad Khan and Riaz Ahmad, had been executed in April by Indian Army officers. A colonel and a major were suspended from duty, a rare enough event, suggesting that their superiors knew exactly what had taken place. The colonel claimed that the young men were separatist militants who had been killed in an encounter near the line of control, the border between Indian-controlled and Pakistani-controlled Kashmir. This account is regarded even by local police as pure fiction. Public opinion in India itself is mute. The parties of right, center, and left prefer to avoid the subject, to fear that political rivals will question their patriotism. Kashmir is never spoken of and has never been allowed to speak. With its Muslim majority, it wasn't permitted a referendum in 1947 to determine which of the two countries it wished to be part of. In 1984, when I was in India, I asked Indira Gandhi, the Indian Prime Minister, why she had not taken advantage of the birth of Bangladesh in 1971, when Kashmiris had watched with horror how the Pakistani army treated their co-religionists and allowed a referendum. She remained silent. I pointed out that even Sheikh Abdullah, the chief minister of Kashmir, was convinced that India would win if a democratic election were held at that time. Her face clouded. He's completely untrustworthy, she told me. I had to agree on that, but her refusal to contemplate the very idea of Kashmiri self-determination, promised and then reneged on by her father, was extremely troubling. Today, we live in a world in which the Indian ruling elite is not prepared to consider any concessions at all. And so natural disasters will continue, and they will be compounded by the numerous human tragedies which result from the military occupation of Kashmir. And while the rest of the world sends in money to help manage the floods and its aftermath, very few people in the world are concerned by what is actually happening in normal times, so-called normal times, to the people of Kashmir themselves. Is there a solution to the continuing political crisis in Kashmir? There is, but there are no leaders of vision who could actually implement it. I don't think that any Indian government is going to allow the Kashmiris to determine their own future. Both Pakistan and India have nuclear weapons, and a serious war between the two states would lead to massive destruction. So that is clearly not an option for either side. What is a peaceful option would be, as I have argued many times before, a European Union-style structure that allows the states to maintain their independence, but to work together on certain issues like trade, like travel, like ending visa restrictions on each other's citizens. And were it to become something like that, then both the Kashmir issue in India-Pakistan and the Tamil question in Sri Lanka could be solved through discussions. The Kashmiris want to be left alone. They don't want a huge standing army. They want a local police force. They are even prepared for India or Pakistan or both to handle foreign policy. They just want everyone out. Effectively, what they want, most Kashmiris, is an autonomy and non-interference by either Pakistan or India, and a safeguard that this will take place. But for this to happen, you need politicians of vision, and they do not exist anymore.